What's up, everyone? Welcome to Life in a Show. I'm your host, Jason Wojo. On the Life in a Show, we help people make more, work less, and live better by creating lives and businesses they absolutely love. I am joined by my Polish co-host, Polish Peter.
Hey, dude. What's going on? Glad to be back recording here. And I'm excited about this particular episode because we're going to be talking about these little guys.
Ooh, if you're watching right now, Peter has a $1 bill. Wait, where did you get that $1 bill, Peter? I'm just curious.
Well, I
did you earn that?
Yes.
I don't think
that's how much they pay me.
Yeah, I don't think I want to know where you earned that $1 bill. Anyway, on this show, we're talking with a really, really cool guy. His name is Rocky Lalvani, and he is a profit first he has a podcast called Profit First Answer Man, but he's just a really cool guy, very knowledgeable. He's had a ton of real life experience, and he's going to talk about money and the management of money, the perception and thoughts, patterns around money, some of the limiting beliefs we have around money. So if you're someone who maybe has struggled with making money or keeping money, I think you're really going to enjoy this episode.
Yeah, I want you guys to really listen to it for your own self, because when I was actually not listening, but on this interview, one thing that struck me really well is when he was talking about how people live, right? If you made $1 million, how do you live versus how you probably should be living? And I love that particular analogy that he used there. And a whole bunch of nuggets in this episode. So I want you guys to listen to it. Yeah.
Tons. All right. Let's go to our interview right now with Rocky Lalvani. Rocky, what's up, man? Welcome to Life in a Show. Great to see you again.
It's great to see you too, Jason. And I'm excited to meet Peter.
Oh, you don't know what you're in. You're sure about that?
I am ready.
Well, bring it on. Let's do this.
So, Peter, I met Rocky in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I was working Life in a booth, and he comes over and we start chatting. The dude's super interesting. He's very knowledgeable, and I'm like, man, we have to get. And there's quite a bit of actually overlap with some of the things that we share as well. And so I wanted to get him on the show. Rocky, tell our listeners like a little bit about yourself to bring them up to speed.
Sure. I'm an immigrant to the United States. So my parents came here when I was a little kid. I was 2 years old, and they were starting life over for their second time. And back then, currency restrictions weren't like they are today, where you can just move money around the world and do all of that. So they essentially had $25 to start over with life. We did have some family here, so they did have a place to land and to get started. And little by little, I saw them and their friends slowly start to figure out the American dream and to kind of move up that economic ladder over time. And they would all get together and they would just talk. They would talk about money. They would talk about how they were doing things, how they were figuring things out. And I guess I never realized till much later what a gift that was, because I just assumed everybody understood money. I understood, how to make it, how to save it, how to use it. Those were the types of conversations that I was constantly being kind of engaged with as the parents were talking. And I later came to find out that most people are not taught money. And as I look back at my education, I'm like, yeah, I went to school for 12, 13 years. They didn't teach me money. I got a Bachelor of Science in Economics. They didn't teach me how to build wealth. I got an MBA. They surely didn't teach me how to build wealth. And I'm like, oh, this is why this is such a problem. And so a big part of what I try to do today is help people to understand money, how to use it, and how to build it so that they have freedom. Because that's the other thing I learned. I chased the money, and I found out the money's not going to make you happy, right? It's just a tool to use. And you've got to figure out that balance to create the margin and then enjoy your life, which is what you guys all talk about. So we're in alignment.
Yeah, we are speaking the same language, my friend. And so two things come to immediate mind right now is one is like, why don't people learn about this stuff and why isn't it common? And then the follow-up for that is like the people that seem to just kind of pursue money end up, I mean, they work everything, sacrifice everything to accomplish it. And then they get to the end and they're like, this isn't what I thought it was. And like, why do we tend to do that as well?
So for the first part, I think there are a lot of cultural things around talking about money. There's a lot of emotion tied to it. If you look at the Bible, there's a lot in the Bible about money that people don't realize that it's probably one of the most talked about subjects. The problem is everybody takes things out of context. So people say, money is the root of all evil. Well, you missed a part of the quote. The love of money is the root of all evil, which kind of touches on your second point. Those people who are going after the money because they've been told, if you have all this money and the fancy car and the fancy house, your life will be perfect. Well, as people find out, they get all of that and they realize that that was another lie that they were told. I remember growing up, we were told two things: never ask a man his salary and never ask a woman her weight. Right? So
that's not bad. I like that.
There's all this emotion tied to it. And if you think about it as a kid, most people get negative money stories, right? We can't afford that. Money doesn't grow on trees. And all of these negative types of emotions, or you're told that rich people are evil. Well, if this is what you're told as a kid and this is how you're programmed, what's going to happen to you as an adult? You're going to be like, oh, it's hard to make money, instead of it's easy to make money. Oh, if I get too much money, I'm going to turn into that evil person. I'm going to lose my beliefs or my character or whatever it is. And so you got to break through all of this. And I think more so now, I've seen in the last 10 to 20 years through programs like yours, right? People are starting to have honest conversations about money, how to generate money, how to keep money, because that's the hardest part. It's easy for a lot of people to make money. And I know some people go, no, it's not. It is easy to make money. It's even harder to keep it. And the other thing is, I think we're just told this dream life, right? You grow up, you go to school, you go to college, you get a good job, you buy a nice car, and, you'll be happy. And the truth of it is that isn't so. And I think too many people are just chasing the wrong dream because we don't have honest conversations about what it really means to live life.
So what I'm hearing is, like, in addition to maybe saving yourself some self-discovery of like, hey, these guys are right. And, having all this money doesn't make my life 100% better. I'm also hearing that we got to kind of somehow clean up the emotional baggage associated with even talking about money, because that's what's going to really keep us from really having some heart-to-heart conversations. And like, it's kind of right. You hit it right in the head. Like, and this is weird. When I first got into real estate investing, for instance, I remember people saying what they made on a deal, and it was the most uncomfortable thing for me to hear. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like taboo. You're not supposed to talk about that. And of course, over time, I became very comfortable talking about money, but I noticed for some of my friends, I'll mention just numbers of things that have happened, and it becomes absolutely awkward. Like they are not comfortable with it. And is there a solution around that, or we just have to like kind of learn the hard way?
You don't have to learn the hard way. I think the first question you ask yourself is, money is, and what is your answer? If you ask yourself, what does money mean to me? And start listening to what you're saying. And what you're saying is your subconscious programming, right? It'll come out naturally. And as part of that, you'll start to understand who you are. And then you have to ask yourself, is it true? Is that really what the case is? So it does take time to essentially reprogram ourselves. But you have to realize the human brain is lazy, right? And people don't realize that our brains probably suck up about 25% of the calories we burn every day. And yet it's not even moving, right? It's sitting there processing information. And the brain says, I need to process this information as quickly as possible and ignore as much as possible. So let me give you an example. You all drive somewhere, right? You drive to work. When you first learned to drive as a kid, I know when I had to teach my kids, it was hair raising trying to teach these kids how to drive, right? But then over time, you start to drive, and now you go to work, you drive there, you're drinking your coffee, you're doing something else. You don't even remember a conscious thought involved in driving, except when something happened out of the ordinary, which I know you had Mike on your show for talking about Get Different. And he talked about the same thing. We start seeing things, we just put them in boxes and we let them alone. It's only when you see an interruption that occurs. And so our minds are programmed for this. And so your money scripts are programmed, and you just have to challenge them and you have to reprogram them. The worst part is most of our money scripts, along the rest of the scripts that our mind runs on, were created between 7 and 13 years of age, which means you're running on childish programming. And if you don't constantly challenge your programming, you're stuck. And I think that's the biggest problem people face. They're running on this childhood programming.
So do you think that it's so I absolutely agree with you. There's this negative programming, and I'm curious as to how the presence of that shows up in terms of people's difficulty in making money or keeping money. So do you feel that like the negative programming either, number one, prevents us from kind of doing the things we need to do to make money and we sabotage ourselves? Or is it like the negative programming, or is the negative programming kind of just create some sort of, and I'm not like a manifest guy necessarily, like not like any kind of magical way, but is there a negative effect to having these negative thoughts that like really, money just doesn't, those opportunities don't present themselves? Like, what I'm trying to say, is it more of like the action based or like what you're bringing into your presence?
I think it's both. Okay. We all have a money thermostat, so to speak, within ourselves, right? And for some people, it's like, well, I'm worth $50,000 a year at work. Well, how'd you decide that? Someone else goes, I'm not working for 50 grand. Are you crazy? I'm worth 200 grand. They all have that certain number. And it is programmed. It's somewhat of it goes back to, am I enough? What am I worth? We tend to put that number on there. And I think manifesting. So can I sit here and say, I'm going to have $500,000? Sure, I can say that. Will I? No. But if I start to say, I want to have $500,000, this is my goal. Okay. Well, what do I need to do to make $500,000? Well, what are the different paths to getting there? And then you have to go do them, right? You don't just sit here and manifest money. You do the work.
Do the work, yep.
That ends up creating that type of thing. And real estate is a classic example of this, because I think a lot of people will look at real estate and go, they'll look at something and they'll go, oh, well, I can only make $10,000 doing this. And I challenge them. I go, well, how is that guy making $200,000 doing the same thing? He's looking at things differently, right? We all look at things through our lens, through our programming. And until you start changing the way you look at things, you're not going to see that. And so it's a process. There's no overnight success in this.
So I love this conversation because a lot of what you're saying totally resonates with me. Like I came from out of the country too. I'm an immigrant as well. Like you mentioned in the beginning, my conversation about money is problems, because when I was growing up, all I saw was mom and dad fighting, right? So what I want to ask you, as far as that goes, because you mentioned how we think differently, how we operate differently, and it's a process. How do you think about money? What is your process? How do you think differently? I wanted to kind of get into your head a little bit to figure out what is it that you're thinking about, how are you looking at it, and how do you use that money to get more money?
So for me today, money is a tool that allows you to have freedom. So I'm in a mastermind, and basically the one thing they say is, if you have money, you don't have problems, right? Because everything is solvable at that point. Something may come up, but it's really not a problem, because money will solve most problems. They're not going to solve emotional problems and some of the interrelationship problems, but they will solve some of the others. If you look at business is all math. And when you understand the math of your business, you can figure out what you need to do to make X amount of money. And then you have to figure out, how does that meet with your skill sets? And do you have the ability to do that? So money is nothing more than a tool, and it can be used a wide variety of ways. But be careful, because it's like, if you see a guy with a hammer, everything's a nail. And understand it can be used in a variety of ways. It's not just a hammer. It's a screwdriver, it's a drill. And depending on how you use it and what you turn it into, it gives you that ability. But you've got to have a mindset to think differently and not be stuck in the box. And I think most of us, when you go through school, you're told this is the way things are. You're not taught to say, what are the possibilities? You're taught you must do it this way. Like if you go to math class, if you don't show your work and your work doesn't match exactly with the way they wanted you to do it, they give you incorrect or they take points off. Life's not like that, right? There's a million ways to solve a math problem. No one is right. Figure it out for you. And building wealth is a math problem.
Is you mentioned before that one of the biggest purposes of money is to accomplish and achieve freedom. Why do you think so many people don't, I know a lot of people that make a lot of money, but they are not free at all. What happened in that? What's the disconnect there?
So I think this is the biggest question that starts to come up once you have some money and you see success. It's the question of how much is enough. And I think people really struggle with how much is enough. And I think they keep wanting more and more. And the problem with that is no matter how much more you have, you're not going to get happier. So I'm sure you guys know at a certain number, and they say 75,000, that was an old study. So maybe today it's 100 and a quarter, whatever. At a certain level, you're going to be happy. More money isn't going to change that. But yet we chase, and we're taught to chase. I need the fancier car. I need the fancier this. I need the fancier that. There's always something new. And I think learning to let go of that struggle is different. I'll be honest. I go into Costco, I see the new TV. I'm tempted. You see the commercial for the new Mercedes or the new Tesla. I'm tempted. But it's learning to say, okay, even if I go buy that new car today, 6 months from now, I'm in a sense, I'm miserable because I got this big car payment. There's no longer the joy of the car. And my neighbor just bought something different and better. And it's learning to say no. And I think that's a very difficult thing to do, is to learn to say enough.
So how do you deal with that yourself? How do you learn to say no? Do you have something bigger than your vision, or what is it that allows you to say no to those things?
So, and I'll give you this going backwards, because I think this is where everyone struggles, right? You walk into Costco, you see the big fancy TV. It's like big fancy TV or letdown, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what are you going to pick? Big fancy TV. You go into the store and you see chocolate cake or no chocolate cake. Well, that's an easy question. Chocolate cake. So you've got to have a counterbalance. So for me, it was big fancy TV or the ability of freedom to tell my job, go screw yourself. I'm out of here. I'm not working. Oh, well, the TV's nice. Telling my boss to screw himself is nicer, right? Chocolate cake is nice. Being fit and healthy and buff and strong is nicer. So you've got to give yourself a bigger picture that you want to achieve beyond that. You need that counterbalance. It can't be it's not too often. Everyone is yes, no. I tell people it's AZ. And somewhere in the middle is M, which is the middle. And you've got to figure out for you, what are the things that are most important? So it's also the thing. Is it the big TV? Is it the fancy car? Is it a nice house? Is it time freedom? Is it, better quality of food? What are the choices you want to make? And then intentionally making them and understanding that every time you do something, it's a trade-off. So most people aren't thinking in terms of trade-offs. They don't think about the other side of the equation, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and everything compounds. So if you start understanding the power of compounding, then you'll start to realize it. One piece of cake is not that big a deal, but a piece of cake every day compounds. And, you won't notice anything in 6 months, but in 6 years, one of us is fat and the other one's buff, right? You start putting the money away a little bit at a time. You won't see much as you put the money away, but over 6 and 10 years, you will see dramatic success. And this is another area that people have problems. And Warren Buffett even said this: nobody wants to get rich slowly, right? If I come out and on your show today and I say, hey, I've got a course, I can have you make $1 million by the end of this weekend, my orders will get flooded. If I come out and say, hey, I've got a course, you can make $1 million over 10 years, it'll be like birds chirping. No, nobody will place the order. And that's what people have to realize. It is slow, steady progress that is going to win this race. And if you're not going to consistently show up, make choices, and think about the choices you make, then you're going to struggle.
Tell me why, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people are stuck there. A lot of people have that challenge. Why is that related to why you said earlier people have a harder time holding on to money versus making money? Is there any relationship there, or is that something else?
No, it's along the same things. I think we're a little bit delusional with that, right? So, and I'll give you the example of a business owner. Business owner says, oh, I made $1 million last year. I can spend, right? But if you actually start to think about it, you go, well, wait a minute. You as a business owner sold $1 million last year. How much did it cost you to do that? Oh, you've got $800,000 in expenses, cost of goods, employees, and everything else. Now, the reality is your bottom line might be $200,000. But mentally, we're like, oh, I'm $1 million business owner, so I'm going to live like $1 million business owner. Mm-hmm. But you've only got $200,000 to actually spend, and you find yourself in a problem. Same thing happens to employees, right? Oh, I make $100,000 a year. I can afford that. You make $100,000 a year. By the time you're done with taxes and everything, maybe you're $80,000 and all the other things that come off your paycheck, you're at $70,000. And yet you're thinking like, oh, I deserve this. I make $100,000, but you don't actually have that. And so I think being clear on what's there. And the other thing is just creating that little bit of margin. If you make $100,000 a year and you've got 70 to spend, but you spend 75, well, you're going to struggle, right? You're going to feel the pain of the payments. But if you're making 70 and you only spend 65,000, well, you've got margin, right? You're not up at night worrying about how am I going to make this payment? How am I going to get out of debt? Oh, the tire blew out. How am I going to pay for that? Creating that margin really, really dramatically helps, but people don't create enough margin in life, I think. We're always trying to do more and more and get closer and closer. I think there's two big secrets to my success. One is allowing the power of compounding. And in order to allow the power of compounding, I needed to create margin. So I needed to live on less than I make. And everyone goes, I can't live on less. Time out. Like, look around your neighborhood. There are probably 5 people on your street who make less than you. And I bet you they are no less happy than you are. So how are they living on less? What are they doing differently? What can you do differently? Where are you wasting your money and your time that you can capture it back to create margin? And I don't know, do you get a lot of guests talking about creating margin, making sure that gap gets bigger?
No, but it's incredibly important, right? Not only in terms of like your sense of peace, but when your business gets shaken, and as we all know, for a lot of businesses, they just went through this. And so I can absolutely see the value in that.
It is. And I know you've had Mike Michalowicz on, and that's what Profit First is. It's about creating margin, and then it's about creating boundaries. So there's 2 books out there, Profit First, and the other book is called The 12-Week Year. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah.
I've heard that. I've not read it.
So it's called the 12-week year, how to get more done in 12 weeks than most people do in a year. Both of these books are built on a single premise called Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law basically says that time and money will expand to whatever is allocated to use it. So let's start with a simple analogy that everyone can remember. You've got a kid and the kid's in school. You got a term paper due, right? You have 3 weeks to do the term paper. How long does it take? 3 weeks. I call BS on that because for the first 17 days, the kid ignored it. About day 14, he's like, oh, I got a term paper due. And probably about day 16, right towards the end, they start rushing to get it all done. We do the same thing with our goals. Well, I have a yearly goal for this year. January comes, I start working on my goal. February comes, I forget about it. If you're a business, you remember your goal in November, and then you start working on it and you push like crazy and you get it done by December.
Rocky, that never happens, man. That never happens.
Well, maybe in Poland. Here in America,
That
it's
never happens.
So it's the same thing. When you're a business owner and you say you want to say build a website, right? The salesman shows up. He's got two questions. What's your budget and how quickly do you need it done? Whatever you tell him, you will get. You say $100,000 in 3 months, it's $100,000 in 3 months. You say 10 grand in 3 weeks, it's 10 grand in 3 weeks. Constrain your time and your money and be more resourceful. Figure out how to do things for less and how to do them faster. And the second thing, people go, well, how does this work? It comes back to the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of what we do produces 80% of the results, which means 80% of what you do is producing 20% of the results. And if you take it a step further, 40% of what you do actually produces 96% of the results. Which means for the average person, if you can figure out the 40% that produces 96%, and you can figure out a second 40%, you will actually be at about 188% of life, and you'll still have 20% margin. But you've got to be super intentional to do that and focused. Most people are too busy on Facebook until it blew up yesterday and they go, oh my God, look at how much time I have. You've got to focus your time and efforts. And when you do that and you constrain yourself, then you have that ability to do it. And, to say this in the simplest of ways, if you don't have a lot of money, you're automatically constrained. And yet you somehow survive and live and eat and get where you want and do what you need to do. How is that possible? Because you have to. And then when we get more, we get lazy.
So for somebody who's not making, let's say that somebody who's not making a lot of money right now, do you typically advise them, hey, look at what you can cut to kind of, have your expenses be less, or are you directing them more towards like, hey, how can you make more money in your available time? Because that's always something we hear from people like that want to quit their job and they're like, oh, but it's going to take me all this extra time to build my business. And how am I supposed to do both at the same time? And they have all these objections as to like why it's possible and how hard it's going to be.
Depending on where you are in the curve, right? If you're at the lower end of the curve, the goal is to make more. Right? If you're at the higher end of the curve, it's more how do you pick up the time and do less and so forth, and how do you optimize your spending? So if I'm making $20 an hour, it's hard to save $5, right? Whereas if I'm making $100 an hour, it's probably not hard for me to save $5. So if you're making 20, how do I go from 20 to 50 to 100? It's going to take more work. Yeah, it is. It's going to take work to do that. Right? Bill Gates and Warren Buffett didn't work 4 hours a week. They busted their thumb for a long period of time. I always used to tell my kids this analogy, right? It's kind of like a slide. The longer it takes you to climb up, the nicer your ride down. So put the efforts into climbing up. It's work to build a business. It's work to do some of these different things. Yes, you are going to have to work a little harder in the beginning. That will give you the success later on. Now, for most people at work, 80% of what they do is useless. So figure out how to get rid of the 80% that's useless. That will give you the margin to work on things. How can you build yourself up in a W-2 job that allows you to launch out into a career? Like, what are the different things that you can do? If you start thinking through this, there are ways that you can do it. I always say get paid to learn on someone else's dime. So let's say you've got a person who's working in a W-2 job. They're not making a ton of money. And they go, well, I want to get started in real estate. Well, quit your job and go get a job working for somebody in real estate. Now you're making the same amount of money. So you haven't progressed on the money side, but you're learning a skill and somebody's teaching you that for free. So rather than buying a $20,000 learn to do real estate course, I'm getting a free course by working next to somebody, and I'm watching the mistakes and I'm learning the systems. And then maybe you go to that person and say, hey, I'd like to invest on your next deal. Would you be willing to take money from me? Nobody turns down money usually, do they?
Yeah, right.
So you got to be creative. You've got to take the time to slow down, to think and try things. And are they all going to work? No. But that's life, right? It's what you do. It's what you face. You just have to get up and keep trying.
I have a question for you. Have you seen in your line of work and everything that you do some examples of creative ways of using money?
Creative ways of use. So I will tell you, let me think of some specific examples. The first thing that I see for most business owners is they spend too much and they don't even know it. So they've got holes in their business where money is going away and they're just unaware. The same thing happens in our personal life, right? You sign up for all these subscription services, you stop using them, and you're paying astronomical monthly fees. So number one is awareness. Number two is being resourceful. So how can I do this for less or without spending as much? So thinking about it, I'll give you the one thing that drives me up the wall, and it's coming up even more now today during COVID. People don't want to go to work because they can't afford the babysitting, so they're staying home. Well, if you've got kids in your home, why don't you take in a couple of your neighbors' kids? Now you're still making money and you're able to stay with your kids, but nobody seems to do this. It just shocks me. Right? Be more resourceful. Figure out another way to do something. There's a million examples. You just got to think about which one applies to your life. Like, what are the ways you can do stuff for less? And sometimes it's doing it yourself, but that's appropriate. So I tell people say, how do I know if I should pay somebody to do this or do it myself? And we have two factors to that. Number one, is it something that you loathe doing that will never get done because it's on your plate? So people who have things that need to get done but refuse to do them because they hate it, that's where you pay somebody. And number two, come up with a time value for yourself. So you might say to yourself, my time value is $40 an hour. And you say, okay, should I mow the lawn or not mow the lawn? Well, I can pay somebody $20 to mow the lawn. Then it makes sense to pay them $20 to mow the lawn while you go do something of value for $40 or hopefully much more in doing that. So I think a lot of it is just thinking through it. Most of my business owners, what they're looking at is margin. Because they're more focused on margin, they're trying to figure out ways to do things for less money. And they think about it and multiply that over time. Because the other thing is to go to your employees and say to them, what's a better, faster way of doing this? They all know how to do things better, faster. Like, look for a lazy person, because lazy people know how to get stuff done the fastest, right? Because they don't do it. So go figure out how to do it for less time and money. and not get sucked into everything. But this all requires thinking time. And I think that's the most important thing. We're all so busy, we don't slow down to think through it. We get stuck in the ruts. And when you start to challenge all of that, that's where the opportunities come up.
So I'm curious, do you set time aside to think about money, you yourself?
To think about, so first of all, I measure my money, right? So I've been using software since the early 90s. If you came to me and said, Peter comes to me and says, well, how much did you spend in this category last year? I can tell you. And Peter says, well, how's that compared to 5 years ago? I can tell you. At this point in life, I don't spend as much time, but we will sit down at least once a year and I will run my spending for the past year and I will look at it and I will go by category. I say, this is where my cash is currently flowing. Am I happy with that? Right? Because budgets are like diets. They suck. Nobody wants to be on one. But if I look at where my money is going and say, you know what? All this money flowed over here. Why is that even happening? I don't even care about that. Let me change the flow going forward. And so I do that on a pretty consistent basis. Monthly, we look at where we are at the end of the month. We look at our investments. What changes do we have to make for the next month? Same thing business-wise. At the end of the month, we look at where did all the outflows from the business go? Am I okay with that? Is that acceptable? Is that what I expected, or did something different happen? And how do I prevent these problems in the future?
Well, Rocky, I'll tell you, man, I feel like I just got a masterclass in money management, but also, you really shared some tactical things, some strategy things, as well as some mindset things. Is there anything else that you can think of that we haven't covered in regards to either a strategy or a simple little hack? You talked about building margin. You talked about, giving deliberate time and concentration and focus to where money's going, being resourceful. Is there anything else we haven't covered yet that would be valuable for our listeners to know as they go on their journey of either making money or trying to keep more of it?
Absolutely. I'll give you a tip, and it's totally actionable and it's totally easy. Automate your savings. Okay. Profit First is about automating the money in your business. On the personal side, you can automate your savings. And so all you have to do, if you're working for a company and you have a 401k, just add 1% to your 401k. By the time taxes come out, it doesn't even make a 1% difference in your paycheck. And the reality is you're not going to miss $1 out of 100, are you? Right? We all waste money. And every quarter, up the automation. So at the end of 90 days, that 1% becomes 2%. You won't miss that dollar again. And keep doing that. And if you do that, literally within 5 years, you're at a 20% savings rate. Remember, I told you this is not overnight success. In 10 years, right? You're 22 years old listening to this. At the time of 32, if you just did this, you'd have a 40% savings rate. Can you imagine how much wealth you're going to build with a 40% savings rate and compounding? I mean, you're guaranteed to get wealthy. And it was all teeny little steps, little teeny things that you don't miss. And that's basically how you do it.
That's awesome, man. Rocky, I want to give you a huge thanks for being on the show. I've enjoyed our conversation. I forget the feeling we could talk for hours, quite frankly, because you have so many things in common, and I love hearing what you're doing as well. Where does somebody contact you to learn more about what you do and your services?
Before we do that, can I ask a favor of your audience?
Yeah.
If you guys enjoy this show, if you like Jason and Peter, would you do me a favor? Would you like this wherever you're listening? Would you share it? Would you leave them feedback and a rating? It really helps them to get the message out, and they would appreciate you for doing that. So just give them a nice shout out. And that's
Thanks, man.
My way of kind of giving back. As far as me, if you're a business owner, the best place to find me is Profit Answer Man. That's the podcast. I teach you how to do the business finances. If you want to learn about life beyond money, come over to Richer Soul. We talk about the intersection of life and money and everything else that allows you to build your ultimate life.
Love it, man. Thanks so much, Rocky. I have the feeling we'll be having you on again here sometime in the future.
Thanks so much for having me, and have a wonderful day, gentlemen.
Man, that was a really cool interview, dude. I met him in Lancaster, in Pennsylvania not too long ago. And we literally talked for like over a half hour. We just chatted about life, money, spiritual stuff. You know, he's just a really interesting guy. He has a lot of great stories we didn't even have a chance to get into on the episode, but I think he really is onto something here and quite frankly, I see some real overlap with what we teach in Life and Air.
Yeah, we do. And by the way, look what happened over this episode. What happened to my dollar?
It multiplied to 20.
That's right.
It's amazing. Wow.
No, I'm serious about things, man. Yeah, it overlaps with a lot of things that we do in Life and There, how we talk about money as a tool, right? And one of the big takeaways that I've gotten like sort of like this aha moment is like someone who made $1 million, like a business owner made $1 million, right? They're thinking, I made $1 million. Now I'm living like a millionaire. I need to live like a millionaire kind of thing. And he talks about the margin, right? So like, if you really look at your numbers and you start to discover what your margin is, what your profit is, let's say your profit is $200,000. If you were in your mindset thinking, okay, I'm a $200,000 man, not a $1 million man, how you live there? If you were to live there, I think your world is going to start growing exponentially. You talked about the compound effect and all those things. So the mindset shift, because, you know, I'm a mindset guy, I think that's a huge thing as far as how you respect money, how you look at money, and how you use money to your advantage and not the other way around.
Well, I found it really interesting how we talked about that. Like, you know, if you don't make a lot of money, you think it's going to make you happy. And so you choose to pursue it endlessly and incessantly, and you'll just do whatever it takes to make a whole lot of money. Oftentimes, you know, you're sacrificing that freedom in the pursuit of it. And then once you get there, you believe this to be true about yourself. And now you've established your identity is making a lot of money. And so, hey, what does someone who makes a lot of money do? Well, they spend a lot of money, and I want to look the part and feel like I'm successful and fit the role. And so, which, by the way, is the exact same limiting belief that keeps you chasing money, because now your expenses have increased and now you have to, you know, continue working. And so that freedom that you really want is just pushed by the wayside. I also thought, man, how true is it that we are kind of weird about money? Like you really can't talk about money with some people. Now, I'll tell you, man, like my Life in Here buddies, like we just talk about money openly, and there's no judgment or comparison or weirdness. It's just like, yeah, it's just factual. And it allows you to kind of like, you know, because what grows in the darkness? Nothing good. Like, and so the more openly you can discuss something and not feel weird or awkward, then I think you really, it opens up a space for you to kind of have these dialogues that allow you to examine some of your beliefs. Cause listen, people are walking around with all kinds of beliefs about money. Most of them aren't good. Right. And so I really think if we can get over that emotional, you know, attachment to, or not emotional attachment, if we can get over that emotional kind of reluctance.
Well, beliefs.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I mean, we mentioned it on the podcast, and I deal with this with all my students a lot. We have money conversations quite a bit because of the fact that affects how you are operating in life as far as how to become financially free, right? As I mentioned on this episode, I used to have a belief money equals problems, right? More money, more problems kind of thing. Even if there is no money, still problems. That's most my belief because of growing up. You know, he mentioned between 7 and 13, this is where you learn a lot about money. So first you got to get discovered what it is that your beliefs are about money. And then, like you mentioned, when you start talking to people in your life, like in Life on There, you start talking about money, what that looks like, what your beliefs are. You start discovering what those are, and you start seeing what their beliefs may be that can help you live your life. You know, one of the coolest things that he talked about, this is an example of, you go to Costco and you see big screen TV and no screen TV versus big screen TV or telling my boss to kind of take a hike. Right. And that's a huge change right there. Right. Because now, are you going to pick up that TV? Probably not, because you're like, I'm going to tell my boss to take a hike.
Right. Well, the other thing I thought was really cool too is, as it relates to the way you think about money, I think people are sometimes they're embarrassed or they're ashamed if they don't make a lot of money. So they don't want to talk about it because like they somehow equate the amount of money they make to their personal worth. And then if they make a lot of money, they either, number one, don't want to brag or make other people feel uncomfortable, or, they're afraid people are going to judge them or look at them differently, or all of a sudden expect them to foot the bill for the dinner. Right. And so there's just, I think it's really interesting to start to look at that stuff for yourself. Like for all of our listeners right now, what are the beliefs you have about money? Just take out a piece of paper and write down money is, and see what you come up with, see what comes out. You might surprise yourself.
Yep. And just start vomiting on that piece of paper. Money is.
How about we write stuff? Like, I don't think vomiting is going to help anyone.
I think they're smarter than that. Okay. I think they know what I'm talking about. But listen, write about money. Money is. Then write about rich people. Rich people are. Or not, wealthy.
Or even poor people are,
Exactly.
Yeah.
All those kinds of things. Yep. Just start writing it all out.
Right.
Without any filtering. Just like I said, just write as much as you can. And then afterwards, go over the piece of paper and see what comes up.
Yeah.
And you might be very surprised.
Because that's where it all starts. Like you said, you're not going to do the things you need to do to make a whole lot of money if you're stuck in the mental quagmire of how you're viewing this stuff. Well, listen.
Did you just say quagmire?
Dude, we're educating our people with new vocabulary every day. And we're going to see some, I know we're going to see some positive comments about that. So
quagmire. All right. Let's quagmire end of this episode.
Listen, we hope you guys have loved this episode. I certainly, and I know Peter loved doing it. We'd love to hear from you. Please leave us a review, a rating. Like Rocky said, we greatly appreciate that. Also, if you want to be part of the conversation, head on over to the Life in Air app. As by now, I know you know that you can get this at lifeinair.com, either for Android, iPhone, or desktop version. Until next time, do the exercises, take a look at your money. And because listen, life is better when you have less money stresses and you have more freedom, because ultimately we are all after that. Everyone have a great one. Take care.